evening. This is Gary Eminent with your host Dale Wetzel, broadcasting live from Peacock Alley. This is the Legislature today. We're going to have a busy show tonight. We got a good couple hours ahead of us. Hey Dale, as we get started tonight, I want to talk a little bit about the great award that Peacock Alley just got this last week down in Tampa. At the 115th Annual National Cattlemen's Association, they picked up this award. There was really one winner. It included restaurants, franchises, corporate, and independents from all over the country. There were 5,000 cattlemen and producers there. It was a great honor. Nobody from North Dakota has ever won it. Those guys competed with the guys from all over the country, Chicago, Dallas, New York, and guess what? North Dakota did it.
Indeed.
So
I was congratulating Dusty the other night for that.
Dale Zimmerman, and he had a crew. They flew down 4 people, and so it was a great award for them. And so, as Dale said it, North Dakota's on a roll. So now they're actually competing with the national top restaurants in America. So that's a pretty good deal.
All right. Well, first of all, let's talk a little bit about what the legislature did today. The House approved allowing the sale of bottle rockets, which have been banned in North Dakota for 4 years. There's a separate bill that was approved that would allow the sale of fireworks from December 26th through January 1st. Now they're only allowed from June 27th through July 5th, so you can celebrate the new year with fireworks if you choose to. The House approved a bill to change the name of the Department of Labor to the Department of Labor and Human Rights. There was a bill defeated to spend as much as $6 million for a new governor's residence and a conference center with up to $3 million privately donated. There was another bill to raise speeding fines a bit. Actually, the bill itself doesn't raise speeding fines that much. It raises some categories of them, but what it does do, it allows local governments with home rule authorities such as Fargo and Bismarck and Minot to increase their speeding fines and fines for moving violations by a substantial amount. They can increase their speeding fines by twice the state limit, and their moving violation fines, such as running a stop sign or running a red light or failure to yield, by up to 3 times the state maximum. Right now, the local governments are capped at the state maximum. In the Senate defeated a proposal to penalize companies that flare their natural gas from newly drilled oil wells after 1 year. The bill would have required them to pay production tax on flared natural gas after 1 year unless they used at least 3/4 of the gas to power an electrical generating station, or if they capped the well, they would not be penalized then, or if they hooked up the well to a gas gathering system which could take it to a processing plant. We're going to get right into a discussion this evening of property taxes. We have as our guests Representative Jim Kasper. He's a Republican from Fargo. He's chairman of the House Government and Veterans Affairs Committee. We have Representative Craig Headland. He's a Republican from Montpelier. He's vice chair of the Finance and Tax Committee. And we also have Jerry Kelsh, Representative Jerry Kelsh, a Democrat from Fullerton. He is a former House Democratic leader. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
First of all, Mr. Kasper, Representative Kasper, you have a couple of bills in right now to limit the growth of property taxes, and I would like you to describe what your strategy was in crafting these bills and what you hope to do with them.
Well, Dale, I've been working for 3 legislative sessions on property tax reform and have been unsuccessful. I think this time around we're going to do something meaningful in the area of property tax reform. There's a big difference between relief and reform. Relief is giving more money to the people. Reform is stopping the growth of property taxes. The key bill, I believe, to do that is House Bill 1290, which will cap the dollar amounts that the political subdivisions can increase their budgets from the previous year by no more than 3% over the previous year's dollars. So if your budget happened to be $1,000 last year, you can go to $1,030 next year. You get new growth that you can add in on top of that, and property that's coming off of property tax relief you can add in. So there are ways, and you go to vote of the people. And to me, we're being told by the local political folks, this should be local control. Well, this bill gives it to local control to vote of the people. If the people want to have more than 3% budget increase, the local subdivision people can go to the vote of people and ask their permission. If we don't do that, we're going to be on a merry-go-round. We're going to continue to spend more and more taxpayers' dollars for property tax, and the relief from the reform won't happen. To me, that's the key bill.
Representative Headland, what do you think of that approach?
Well, Dale, and thank you for asking me to be here. I agree with the approach. As you can see, I am a co-sponsor of the legislation.
Indeed.
So I think moving forward, if we are going to avoid another initiated measure similar to measure number 2, we have to do something to slow down the growth in property taxes.
Representative Kelsh, you had a bill. It's been defeated actually, but you favored the approach of increasing the distributions of state sales and motor vehicle excise tax to local governments in order to give them essentially money to. The theory was if you provide more state support to a local government, they can keep their property taxes down. Why don't you discuss what your logic was there?
Thank you, Dale, for inviting me. I was wondering, could I comment on 1290 a little further?
Oh, absolutely. Please do. Yes.
One of the reasons I think there's a lot of flaw in that bill is we got an email today from a superintendent, and he said the property tax relief was eaten up in his town by the flood of 2009, that they had to put the special assessments on, or a higher mill levy to the city. 2010, the same thing, and then they had to put some special assessments on. You know, if you're in the middle of the flood and you have to go to the vote of the people to think you're going to be able to do anything, that's really tying you up. And the flaw of the whole situation is that they think that as local governments are just spending money freely. They're not spending money freely. They're only doing what's needed to be done. It takes lots of money to do that nowadays. The cost of fixing and maintaining roads has doubled, maybe more than that by now. If we tie them to a 3%, they're not going to be able to do the things they need to do out in those rural areas. Getting back to the bill that I had proposed is the state aid distribution fund now gets 0.4%, and that goes to counties, cities, a little bit to townships. It's a replacement for the old personal property tax, is the way that this got started. When that was first started, 1% of the sales tax went to that. And that was on your combines, on your cows, on the new table you had, new Davenport you had in your house. All those types of things that weren't taxed in any other way. People said, you know, the life of a property tax guy at that time, or the nice life of a property tax guy at that time wasn't very good. People were upset, so it got changed. And it started out at 1%. The sales tax went to that, and then it went to 0.6, and then during the tough times of the state in the 80s, it was the governor negotiated with the counties and cities to lower it, and when the first year I was here in 1985, it was $52 million went to counties and cities in the state aid distribution fund. It went up to 58 one time, then back to 52, and so what my bill did was took the first 1 cent of sales tax, put it in the state aid distribution fund, and the cities and counties got to spend half of that, and the other half went directly to property tax relief. And I consider that reform, because that would have been permanent. And you know, there's a lot of things that aren't permanent. When you can have to negotiate every year, like the counties come in, negotiate this, negotiate that, they have, it's not permanent reform. That's kind of a begging system.
Representative Kasper, what do you think about the approach of giving essentially more state sales tax collection to local governments and essentially trusting them to do with it what is correct?
Well, the approach that I favor is not sales tax reform, as has just been mentioned. The approach that I've been working on for 3 sessions is the state will make a distribution from the general fund to the property tax relief. And now the governor has a proposal that's going to work under the education side of things. My bill 1273 works in the area of homestead tax credits to residents, to commercial, and to ag land. I see that the combination of the governor's approach and my approach makes a nice package. There's another bill out there that will look at it a little bit differently. But the fact of the matter is, if we continue to fund property taxes at a higher level, we've got to put caps on. Otherwise, the local people can keep on spending and spending and spending, and they keep on pointing the finger back at the legislature that it's our fault. So the idea that if a flood would occur, you know, right now what would they do if a flood occurs? They're not going to, if they have to increase their budget, they're going to have to ask for disaster aid or federal government disaster. They're not going to go back and change their budget. They're going to have to find it from someplace. We have disaster funds in the state government that might help them. So the idea that caps won't deal in a flood, they won't deal with a flood right now. So I think that's an argument looking for a solution.
What about the argument that Representative Kelsh mentioned, that essentially the 3% growth is not enough, that expenses of local governments are increasing by a greater rate than that?
Well, you know, Dale, that's always an excuse. We never have enough money. We always need more. I believe that you have to start looking for effectiveness and efficiencies. You know, the computer age is supposed to reduce our manpower needs. But what's happened is the cost of IT has gone up, and more people are needed to run the IT system, so overhead has gone up. State government could take a good look at its own way of operating, and I've been advocating that for years. We should be looking at ways to be more effective, more efficient. We should be looking at eliminating programs that we don't need, that are duplicative. We never do. I believe the local authorities that are in the cities and the counties and the school districts need to look at ways to be more effective, maybe consolidations, reducing their overall spending. There's ways if they look. What
have been the barriers to doing what you would like to do, which is to limit the growth of property taxes in dollars?
Dale, remember what Benny Meyer used to say? If you don't have the votes, you don't have the votes.
He did. Although he said it in a German accent, yes, which I can't mimic very well.
I'm a German heritage, but I don't quite get it the way he did. He was really great at that. But if I've tried to put cap bills in the last 3 sessions. They got beat every time.
Dale, if I could just speak to what I believe is the flaw in taking state revenue sources and permanently giving them away to a political subdivision. You know, when we do that, we put state-funded services at risk. You know, and it's fine to talk about it in times of prosperity like we are today, but you know, none of us know what the future is going to bring and how long the revenues are going to continue coming in to the state as they have. So I think it's important that the state protects its revenue stream, does what it can to help out in funding services at the political subdivision level, but you know, keeps those state-funded revenue sources available to the state.
How do you think that this is all going to shake out here? I mean, there are a number of approaches, and we discussed some of them. What do you think is the final package is going to look like? What do you think has the most support?
Well, frankly, I believe that we should provide as much as we can in income tax relief, but that might be a question and story for another day. There are other viewpoints out there in how we move forward with property tax relief, and that would be talking in dollars. Of course, I think any relief we do is reliant on some type of local cap, but there's an idea out there that now we continue with the mill levy reduction program that we are currently doing today at the school level, taking some additional dollars, distributing them out on a dollar basis directly to the county to buy down every parcel of property evenly. You know, when you do it through mills at the school level, not every taxpayer is getting the same amount of property tax relief because, as you know, in different taxing districts, a mill generates a different amount of dollars.
What is the? I'd like to ask you three gentlemen what approach you favor in terms of the distribution of property tax relief or reform or whatever one wants to call it. Should it only go to residential property owners? Should it go to residential, agricultural, and commercial? Should it go? Should anybody be cut out, basically? And Jerry, I'd like you to start.
I'd like to start there. No, I think it has to be broad, reaching across all spectrums. You know, you're going to say because you're a homeowner, you get property tax relief. If you're a business owner, you don't, or you're a farmer, you don't get it. It's kind of interesting that income tax gets brought up. I've been to a lot of meetings over the past several years. A lot of them sponsored by Farmers Union, Farm Bureau, and every one of them, and to a person, say we do not need income tax relief. Income taxes in the state of North Dakota is no problem at all to us. And a lot of those farmers are doing quite well right now. They still say it's not a problem. Property tax is a problem. That's what you need to do something about, and that's where you need to do your thing is on property tax, because that's the thing. It's not based on income. We can have a complete crop failure, you still pay the property tax. Income tax only if you make the income. And there are caps. There are caps on every budget in a county. And in the townships have caps. The school district has caps. And we're changing those all the time. As you know, we're going to be down now to the most they'll be able to do other than go to the vote of the people is about 72 mills. 50 is automatic. You have another 10 that the board, by the discretion of the board, and then there's a whole slug of things that you had before, like asbestos removal, transportation, and all those things were put into one category. There's about 18 of them were put into one category and allow you to levy up to 12 mills.
You know, Dale, where I see the problem is the confusion of mills. Just what Representative Kelsh is talking about. The people in North Dakota who don't understand mills, you know what they understand? Our property taxes are going up and we're tired of it.
They understand the bottom line. They understand how much they pay.
And so the bottom line is we need to provide the relief. And when you cap budgets in real dollars, the mills take care of themselves. The people don't have to worry about it. And my approach is to give residential, commercial, and agricultural property tax relief across the board, focusing on North Dakota residents. North Dakota residents is the key where my focus is for the property tax relief.
And how do you accomplish that goal?
By tying the commercial and the agricultural property tax relief to the fact that you have to have a residence in North Dakota.
Representative Headland, what do you think of that approach?
Well, frankly, I would have to disagree with my esteemed colleague, Representative Kasper. I believe all classes of property go to pay for all services that are provided at the local level, and that they should be, when they're relieved with state dollars, they should be relieved in the same fashion. But I want to address something that Representative Kelsh said. He mentioned that nobody is asking for income tax relief. Well, the income tax is exclusive to the state. So we can adjust those rates and those dollar numbers, and we can control the revenue we need to provide our state services. But when we start messing with property tax, and I think you can see this has been the problem that we've been facing over the past 4 or 5 years that we've been providing it. Taxable value comes into the equation and it eats up all the relief. That's the problem with the way we've been doing things, but with a cap, such as Representative Kasper has suggested in his bill, we'll take care of that problem. And the other thing about the income tax, as I said, it'll provide for the revenues that state needs to fund programs in the way they do it. It doesn't impede or pose problems with any political subdivision.
One of the things, Representative Kasper, that's interesting about this whole approach is one of the strategies that's been mentioned is not only to limit dollars that are raised, but also to limit growth in valuation. I want to know what you think about that approach.
Well, Dale, I tried that the last couple of sessions, and it's too confusing and it actually doesn't work. You begin to manipulate the actual market values of the properties with the assessed values, and it's too confusing. And nobody understands it. The auditors hate it. You would end up with totally different variations. And so I threw that out last session. And now the fact of the matter is when you focus on the budgets themselves, then the mill levies and if the assessed values go up, the mill levies have to come down. Because the dollar budget is, here's the budget, and you can go 3% higher. Now you adjust it. So the assessed values go high, mills go down, budget is leveled off.
The problem with that is you have different things in different counties, different areas of the state. If you've got roads like we had in our corner of the state for 3 and 4 years that were impassable, money, dollar after dollar was spent on them year after year to try to make them passable. Not good roads, make them passable. If there would be a limit like that, the counties would be in deep trouble because they could not come up with the money to fix them.
And that's why we're having the special funding with the roads through the governor's budget, about $1.7 billion. So we take my approach, you take care of it that way.
But that's not the case when there's an emergency in your area. That's not the case. How long are you going to wait to get that money? How many months does it take to apply for it? Get those dollars approved and get them, and the county's sitting there not knowing they're going to get them. What are they going to do? They've got to have some flexibility. And you guys thinking that county commissioners or city commissioners put taxes on just for the joy of doing it and spending money, in my opinion, you're all wrong. I sat on the county commission for 8 years, and we are taxpayers also. We do not spend money foolishly. We spend it where we have to, and you have to have that flexibility. If you don't, then the state better be paying a lot more than they are towards all these projects.
Here's the one thing I know. The people in North Dakota's property taxes are too high and going higher. They want a solution. They don't want the verbiage we're having here tonight. They want a solution. So we have to come up with something that's workable.
What do you think is going to happen with, do you think we'll have a reprise of the property tax measure to abolish property taxes if this continues?
Well, certainly, Dale, I believe that, and I've already heard some rumbling about it, that if we don't do anything to stop the rise in property taxes in this session, we're going to face Measure 2 or something similar to it again.
I've heard that over and over. But the reason they voted against it the first time, they know those local subdivisions need flexibility. They can't be capped to where they can't do what they're supposed to do and have to do and told by the state that they have to do.
I believe they voted against it because they were giving the legislature one more chance, and this is our chance.
And we've been speaking this evening with Representative Jim Kasper. He's a Republican from Fargo. He's the chairman of the House Government and Veterans Affairs Committee. We've been speaking to Representative Jerry Kelsh, a Democrat from Fullerton, a former House Democratic leader, and also Representative Craig Headland, a Republican from Montpelier, the vice chair of the House Finance and Tax Committee. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Dale.
Appreciate it.
Welcome back to Legislature Today. This is Gary Ameneth with your host, Dale Wetzel. We just spent a little time chatting about property taxes. Dale, I think we could have probably used another 30 minutes, but I suspect we'll be back to that.
We could use another 30 days.
Yeah. I suspect we'll be back to that subject before the session's over.
Yes.
So.
Well, we're going to be discussing for the next half hour legislative ethics proposals. Excuse me. We have with us this evening Representative Corey Mock. He's a Democrat from Grand Forks, and he is the Assistant House Democratic Leader. We also have Representative Ed Gruchalla, who is a Democrat from Fargo. Normally, he's known for things like speed limit and DUI bills because he's a former highway patrol trooper. But we have him this evening for on the subject of legislative ethics. He's a sponsor or co-sponsor of several of these bills. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Welcome. Yeah.
And we'll start out with Representative Mock. You're the sponsor of a bill that creates a 9-member ethics commission.
Yeah.
And I wanted you to just describe to me what that bill does.
Well, first of all, a little backstory on this, and you're right. So what we have is it's House Bill 1442 for those who keep score at home. But it is the creation of North Dakota's first ethics commission. North Dakota, for those listening, we are one of 3 states without any formal oversight commission or committee over our legislative body. North Dakota, I believe Vermont and Wyoming are the other 2. So this would be the first creation of an ethics oversight and give the citizens a chance to have a little oversight over their elected and appointed officials across the state. The commission was set up to be very balanced. It was a non-partisan, non-political commission. 9 members, 5 of them are appointed by it's here, of the 9, 6 of them are appointed by members of the House or the governor by political appointee, and 3 represent the judicial branch and are nonpartisan. So we really wanted to make sure that this was an issue that was about good government, that if there were complaints, that it was heard before a jury of their peers, that all of the investigations were handled professionally with the resources that they need to truly delve into any complaints without having to go after political witch hunts or worry about it becoming a front-page story before any accusations are ever heard. This is something that I think North Dakotans really believe we need. Again, 47 other states have it. I think it's about high time that North Dakota give that same consideration to this idea.
Representative Gruchalla, what do you think about this?
Well, we started looking at this last year, and Corey was kind of working on the same area as I was, so we kind of ran with it. But we got together and decided, Corey came up with the idea of the Sunshine Act to shine a little light on the ethics and what goes on in government in this state. And myself, having a law enforcement background, I thought that maybe we should be policing ourselves a little better than we were, not only in the House or in the Senate, but we've had some issues in the Legislature where we've had some people that have committed crimes and didn't pay taxes or beat their wives or did other things, and nothing happened. They were able to finish out their terms. They were never called on the carpet, and I thought that we should be policing ourselves and look at something like this.
One of the elements that we have in existing law for the kinds of things you're mentioning, we have new elections for one. We also have the recall. Is that insufficient to deal with legislative scofflaws? Apparently not.
Apparently it's insufficient because they haven't been addressed. Some of the issues that I pointed out were not addressed by recalls.
Do you think that that's necessary? I mean, do you think that people just accepted that someone didn't pay their income tax or assaulted their spouse?
Well, the problem with that is it's you are either entirely innocent or completely guilty. If you are guilty or innocent based only on the voters, you're either absolved by being reelected, or you are not reprimanded until the re-election, in which case you're removed from office. And there's some offenses that I think we can all agree that don't merit termination from office. That removal from a committee chairmanship, for example, might be more appropriate, or just a formal reprimand or a censure for minor offenses. Failure to report campaign contributions or to expend campaign dollars unethically, perhaps that's one where you don't allow them to serve as chairman of a committee, and you make that the punishment for their actions. We have many great legislators in this state, and I'm honored to sit and serve work with this legislation with Representative Gruchalla, and I think him and I can both agree that just by having an accusation should not mean that a person is removed from office. And I think that's the lack of a commission. That's the system that you create pro forma.
And what sort of resources are we going to need to establish the sort of ethics commission that you think would be needed to do the job?
The Ethics Commission would be formed just like any other standing committee. You have legislative members who would serve on it. In this case, it's served by 4 members of the legislature. And just as we meet in the interim, we're called at the call of a chair, and we convene. There would also be 5 other members that are not that do not serve in the legislature. They would be members of the public, could be reimbursed at the same rate as any other commission would. And then you have 3 members of the judicial branch who would be appointed, and this would be under the obligation of their term of office. The resources, we have every agency in this bill, every agency, every department, they would be obliged, just as they would if a state's attorney were to convene an investigation. This commission would have those same resources at their disposal to have a formal and thorough investigation, to make sure that both sides have their information presented, and that it's truly a thorough investigation and hearing to make sure that the facts really complement the judgment.
And Dale, we should point out that this isn't just for the legislature. This is for every elected or appointed official in the state of North Dakota.
Does that include county commissioners, city commissioners?
It does.
Okay. When I was looking at the bill, it said any legislator, elected or appointed executive branch officer, district judge, Supreme Court justice, a candidate for legislature, executive or judicial office, a lobbyist, or a state employee How many investigators are you going to need to take care of all those folks?
Well, again, and it's the investigators. It's there's not any police that go around. I mean, it's if a complaint, and I should point out that this only happens if a complaint is ever filed. So in the case that someone has, there's a complaint that a law has been broken by one of the members who's under the umbrella of this commission, they would convene an investigation. They would serve, and actually I have to back up a little bit. It's not just any complaint. I have to point out that you have 9 members of this commission. So let's say Representative Gruchalla witnesses that there's a complaint out there. He files a complaint to the commission. 5 of those 9 members have to see that there's enough information, enough evidence to warrant an investigation before it can even move forward. So it's not a complaint is filed, let's go investigate. It serves as its own grand jury, which is why it's so politically balanced. It provides its own check and balance. It makes sure that only thorough and valid complaints are moved forward and that we can get the facts out into the public.
Well, wouldn't you need some sort of investigation to determine whether more investigation was needed? I mean, you mentioned that the proposal says any complaint made in writing upon approval of a majority of the commission, and complaints and investigation results aren't public until the investigation is concluded. I was just wondering, how is it that the commission is going to be able to judge whether or not something is worth pursuing in the first place?
Well, and the way that happens, and it happens in many other states, is a complaint is brought to the commission. And let's say they have a closed meeting with the individual who brought the complaint. They weigh the evidence and the reasons for the complaint to be filed, and then they get to convene and decide whether or not the investigation should move forward. So that's upon that time, that's when the investigation would use your state resources to truly decide whether or not misconduct had occurred, and then we can weigh into the facts.
And Dale, we're not assuming this is going to be a real busy commission. We do think North Dakotans appointed and elected officials are very clean and straightforward. However, we do think also, and there's some statistics to back it up, that if you have a commission like that, it does serve as a deterrent if there is a place to file a complaint.
What I was trying to get at is, okay, the complainant, the person who files a complaint, is going to basically have to convince the commission that their complaint has merit, and that's the initial step.
That's correct, and it serves just as any other grand jury would. If you have a complaint, a grand jury in our legal system is convened to decide if there's enough evidence, enough merit to warrant an investigation, and that's how this would serve. And I think Representative Gruchalla, I think Ed is spot on. This is something that you might have a handful of complaints even brought forward each year at best. I think North Dakotans are generally pretty well behaved. Our elected officials are, as the majority leader would say, we hold ourselves to a high code of conduct. It's just that when misconduct does occur and when there are complaints, we want to make sure that the public has a chance to have those facts heard.
Why did you decide in drafting the bill that complaints themselves and investigations of them until the investigation is concluded are not public?
Well, and Representative Gruchalla is. Him and I had visited at pretty good length about this as we were drafting it. We wanted to make sure that you don't weigh a complaint. Well, first of all, we modeled this greatly after many other states and the current legal system. And a pending investigation is not privy to open records. Now, when the investigation is complete and it's closed, that's when those records are made public. And we wanted to model it very similarly after that.
I was also intrigued by the idea that district judges and Supreme Court justices are part of this. I mean, does this violate the separation of powers?
You have members appointed by the executive branch, the legislative branch, and members of the judicial branch. So there are all 3 members. And again, this was something that was modeled after many other states that have had successful commissions that have been operating for many years.
Well, I was just wondering if the argument could be made that the Supreme Court has its own way of disciplining lawyers, judges, and its own justices. And what do they need you guys for? Well,
Dale, this would just be another avenue for a citizen's complaint. Maybe they don't feel by going to the judicial branch to have a complaint about a judge would be the right way to go. Maybe they'd rather go to something independent.
We've been talking about this Ethics Commission bill at some length, but there are other bills as well. One of them would require the reporting of campaign expenditures to any one person or company of more than $200. Could you gentlemen explain why you think that's necessary?
Well, 1430 is a bill that addresses. First of all, did you like the way the last campaign was run in this country, in our state, and on the federal level?
I don't think I've ever seen a campaign that I liked was that I enjoyed.
Well, the citizens.
I've never looked at a campaign and thought, boy, that's a great campaign being run.
Well, I would disagree with you. I think the last campaign that Heidi ran was pretty dark.
Okay.
Anyway,
a slight bias, of course.
Point taken.
Okay. What we didn't like, or a lot of people that I know didn't like, was these out-of-state corporations coming in these PACs and being able to run commercials and advertisements for. Well, they wouldn't be for a candidate. They would kind of hide under something and say this is not paid for by any candidate, and it just kind of got a little out of control, I think, and I think it's getting worse every time. So that's the reason for this bill.
And how would the bill influence that sort of behavior?
Well, Corey, you want to take that?
Yeah, well, so the bill that we have introduced, it's another component to the Sunshine Act. It's one that would require the disclosure of independent expenditures made by non-partisan or non-political organizations. So an individual or a group that comes in and makes an expenditure, not necessarily on behalf of or in opposition to a candidate, but makes that, as Ed had mentioned, this is the ad, do this. This is call Congressman so-and-so and tell them to vote against this, that when they make those contributions or expenditures in North Dakota, that they have to report that. And under current law, as a result of Citizens United, we don't require the disclosure of those dollars. So they really are operating under separate rules than candidates and political parties currently operate under.
Right. We haven't really amended this or yet with that Citizens United ruling in place. So this is an attempt to fix that. On page 3 of the bill, it says independent expenditure, and it spells out what it means. And it means an expenditure made for a political purpose or for the direct purpose of influencing the passage or defeat of a measure if the expenditure is made without the express or implied consent or cooperation of any not in concert with or at the request or suggestion of any candidate or candidate committee. So I think that's the basis of the bill. We want to shine the light on outside contributions and PACs and make sure that people know when they're running an ad in the state who's paying for it, how much, and who's it for.
There's another bill that requires, I think the purpose of it is to require a disclosure of legislator trips to conferences and such things that are paid for by outside groups but not the taxpayer. Right. Could you discuss what that is? That's
a bill that's been being introduced by Representative Gail Mooney, and she's from District 20 out in eastern North Dakota. That's a bill that it does two things. One, that and we've used this as an example that's going to be heard tomorrow. Is we have tremendous organizations that like to. First of all, let me say this: that lobbyists and our organizations that represent the citizens of the state, because we have no staff, they truly are the providers of information to all legislators. So we rely on those who are experts in their field to provide us with the information when weighing our decisions. Of course, they have to register as lobbyists. We need to know where they're receiving their funding, who they're influencing or representing when they try to influence bills. Now, what this bill would do is one, when one of those organizations pays for a legislator to attend a conference where model legislation is discussed, deliberated, or presented, that money has to be disclosed. Under current law, organizations can pay for a legislator to attend any conference in and around the world. It could be in North Dakota, it could be in Minnesota, it could be in the Cayman Islands. And legislators do not have to disclose who is paying for that trip or that they even went on that trip publicly. That's it's not a campaign contribution, but that information is never disclosed to the public. So we thought that it's best that as we go on trips, if we go on trips that are not paid for using tax dollars or your employer or political subdivisions for educational purposes, that has to be disclosed to the people of the state. Does it have to be something where model legislation is presented, or can it be any conference sponsored by an interest group? the bill is written that if legislation is discussed, presented, or deliberated by the attendees, and you're there for the purpose, if you're there for official business, that you would have to disclose that trip, and you would have to. And again, it's not meant if you pay out of pocket. That's not the intention. But if it's paid for on your behalf, or you are reimbursed for those expenses, all that we are asking is that you disclose that to the public, that so-and-so organization paid for you to attend this conference, and what the purpose of the conference was.
I was just wondering why it's limited to conferences at which legislation is discussed. Why isn't it to any conference that's sponsored by an interest group?
Well, we just and it's just other states have done it this way. It's just it's related to legislature. If you're a farmer and it's related to corn, maybe it's not related to legislature. So that would be omitted. But anything related, legislative related.
It really goes after in another part of that bill, it redefines what a lobbyist is. And in North Dakota, anyone who comes to the legislature advocating for or against a bill, they have to, if they represent an organization, they register as a lobbyist. But let's say John Doe here approaches a representative and says, I want you to introduce this legislation. We're putting it in a couple of states. If you can get this in, that's going to be tremendous. They never come to the Capitol to testify. They never register as a lobbyist. All they did was give the model legislation to a legislator, and it was introduced and maybe passed. Under law, that person was not a lobbyist.
See, it appears that this bill is targeted specifically at the American Legislative Exchange Council, which is a corporate group that.
Is there an acronym for
ALEC? Yes.
Oh,
yes. Okay. And it appears that is the target here, because that is what ALEC does. Is they offer model legislation to legislators. They also host conferences and pay expenses of legislators. And it seems like this description of what this bill would do, or who it would affect, kind of fits that organization to a T. Is that deliberate?
Well, I think ALEC meets some of that criteria, but they're not the only organization that does that. There are many entities that will offer model legislation, and it's not going after anybody. This is a matter of making sure that if you are a legislator and a special interest is paying for you to attend a conference or a meeting to discuss legislation, that should be disclosed, and that anybody who presents model legislation to a legislator for the purposes of passage and introduction, that they have to register as a lobbyist and follow under the exact same guidelines and rules that any other lobbyist in North Dakota would.
Dale, there are some groups or think tanks, if you want to call them that are getting very influential and are sending out model legislation. Well, actually, they're actually bringing freshman legislators in on a routine basis whenever they're elected and running them through their program, and then they submit bills with them to take back. And some of these places are getting so influential that they're actually controlling a lot of legislatures around the country, or a certain segment of them.
One of the things that I've noticed in looking at these bills is that there are some changes made in terms of what sort of expenditures must be reported, or whether expenditures should be reported in, and campaign disclosure generally. Could you talk about what the goals are as far as those bills are concerned?
Well, here's the thing. Most people in North Dakota, when you make a contribution to a candidate, that money goes to pay, to the friends of your candidate. That money is you donate that. It's not taxed. You can't use it as a tax exemption, and it goes for the purposes of electing a certain individual. In North Dakota, you don't report the expenditures. And that money can be spent on a yard sign, a commercial on TV or radio, or it can be spent on a laptop computer. It can be spent on car payments, on housing reimbursements. It can be spent on your cable bill. And in North Dakota, that's without the requirement of reporting expenditures of campaign funds. Many have argued that it is a form of tax evasion by taking income from a political campaign, using it for non-political purposes, more personal expenses, and you never have to report it. It's we're one of a few, if any. I don't even know if there's many other states that don't require candidates to report expenditures for political campaigns. So what our bill, or another one of the Sunshine Act bills that we'll hear tomorrow, would require any candidate who makes an expenditure beyond $200 has to report who the campaign or the expenditure was made to, the address, and what the purpose of the expenditure was made. If it's to Best Buy to buy a laptop, well, you have to put that on there. At least that way it's available on the reports that you can find at the Secretary of State's site.
How would these reports be checked?
Well, it'd be the open records. I mean, you'd have to file them with the Secretary of State.
I guess I say I'm a candidate. I report that I spent $200 at Best Buy on a laptop. Who is going to check to see whether that's actually the case?
Probably the opposite party.
Well, I'd say this: if there's a potential complaint, I think that's a good one to go to the Ethics Commission that we're going to create this session.
One of the things I noticed about the bills is that they have, I think, exclusively Democratic sponsors. Why is that?
Actually, not all of them are. Some of them. The Ethics Commission is bipartisan. We have Representative Nancy Johnson from Dickinson, who's a supporter of the Ethics Commission. Many of the others, when Ed and I announced this back in August of last year, we had many of our colleagues come forward and say, listen, we believe in that cause. It's a part of the Democratic platform to believe in clear, open, and transparent government. We want to make sure that we'd like to sign on. It's not a partisan issue. It's nonpartisan. We have Republicans and Democrats in North Dakota that support these issues, and we look forward to having Republicans and Democrats in North Dakota support this when it comes to a vote.
To what extent did you try to get Republican co-sponsors? Because when I'm looking through these bills, you mentioned that your ethics bill does have a Republican co-sponsor, but of the package of bills here, she's the only Republican on any of them. And to what extent did you try to get bipartisan support for, say, for example, for disclosing campaign expenditures or any of these other bills?
Well, I'll just speak for myself, but when I took the bill I have around, I was turned down by several. And once they heard what it was, they didn't want any part of it. So,
in some cases, I have to say, and I know we're coming to a break, but I have to say that I visited with a lot of individuals, Republicans, and said, listen, I think that's a really good concept, and I'll tell you what, I can't sign on to it today, but I'll take a look at it when it comes to the floor.
We've been speaking this evening with Representative Corey Mock. He's a Democrat from Grand Forks. He's the person whose voice you just heard. He is the Assistant House Democratic Leader. We've also been speaking to Representative Ed Gruchalla. He's a Democrat from Fargo, and he is a sponsor or co-sponsor of the bills we've been talking about to regulate legislative ethics and campaign reporting. They're getting their first hearing tomorrow morning in the House Government and Veterans Affairs Committee. And thank you, gentlemen, for showing up and discussing these bills. We're greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Dave.
I've got some leftover campaign funds that I'm going to go downstairs to spend now.
Oh, my goodness. Just make sure you report that.